Keep saying vulgarities. Can you tell I have strong feelings about this topic? What could possibly go wrong here? Hey friends, it's your good friend Tim Campbell-Smith, digital marketing speaker, teacher, and trainer, and today I'm going to talk about my year-and-a-half-long experience with BNI, or Business Networking International. Please note this is entirely my experience. This isn't an explicit endorsement or critique. Okay, maybe it's a little bit of a critique of BNI. I am going to be honest, and I'll share this at the end in my conclusion as well. I think BNI is amazing. It's wonderful if you meet some criteria and there's some things working in your favor or that you make work in your favor. But in this video, we're going to cover the good, the bad, and the weird with BNI, so that you make the most educated decision in deciding whether maybe you should join BNI or not, or maybe if you want to stay as part of BNI. Before we go too far, make sure to like and subscribe for all things digital marketing, speaking, teaching, and training. Okay, so let's get into it and start with what exactly is BNI, just real quick. It stands for Business Networking International, and they are a franchise system networking organization. So basically, you set up what is called a chapter, and a city can have one chapter, can have multiple chapters, and in your chapter, you have one type of professional, and only one type, so it's exclusive. There's only one residential realtor, there's only one mortgage broker, there's only one chiropractor, that kind of thing. You meet on a weekly basis, and you have a very regimented meeting format where you follow some protocols on how the meeting should run. And the basis of the whole thing is that you are expected to give referrals and referral business to other members of your chapter, and therefore you will then receive referral business back. So, its claim to fame is in how regimented the referral process is to generate referral business. That's the kicker with BNI. Overall, I loved my BNI experience. I had a great time. I won awards. I trained other people on really navigating BNI and helped them with that. I really got a return on my investment quite quickly. That said, there were definitely some caveats that I wish I'd known about earlier. So in giving the most honest, accurate picture of what to expect from BNI, and maybe to help you decide whether or not BNI is right for you to join, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the weird. So let's actually start with the bad. I don't want to end on this note. Bad reason number one behind BNI is how culty it is. Y'all, I had some friends in BNI and we would joke about how culty it was. The whole thing is headed up by Dr. Ivan Meisner, who is the founder of BNI, and you know, you're constantly encouraged to listen to podcasts with Dr. Ivan Meisner, and you are encouraged to follow the networking tips of Dr. Ivan Meisner. And when senior leadership visits your chapter, they just share advice from Dr. Ivan Meisner. And I thought it was frankly bullshit. Like, the advice that was coming from him was so ridiculous. It was irrelevant, barely worked. Ironically, people would ask, like, Tim, how do you bring so many visitors? Tim, what's your secret to sending referrals? Tim, what's your secret to getting so many people to join chapters? And my first advice was always, don't listen to the advice from Dr. Ivan Meisner. But people really struggled with that. So kind of shows it's a little bit culty. Next, if you go as a visitor to a BNI chapter, they have a high pressure regimented protocol to really try and engage you to join the chapter. So the secret is that you kind of have to be a professional no sayer. You have to say no when you visit and they try to get you to join the chapter. Don't get me wrong, visiting chapters, great way to network, get used to pitching, meet other people, but they are gonna go in for a high pressure sales ask, and you gotta say no to that. Next, and I've listed this as one of the bad factors to BNI, but it can also be a good one. It is extremely regimented and structured. Originally for me, one of the big reasons why I wouldn't join is because it was so regimented and structured. And at the beginning, it wasn't my favorite thing, but I actually learned to love it, and we'll talk about that in the good section. But if you don't like regimented structure, BNI is gonna be a tough one for you. Next, and this one frankly pissed me off. mandatory trainings and bait and switch, but we're going to talk about that second one in a bit. Mandatory training. So when you join BNI, they get you to do this mandatory training to be part of the chapter and to speak. You know, you get your elevator pitch in your meetings, but also once in a while you get a chance to deliver a 10-minute talk to your fellow members. You can't do that unless you do a training. And the training is so nonsensical. It's so prescriptive. It tells you exactly what to do and how to do BNI, but also like it just has some really shady tactics. I remember one time in my training, it actually talked about like, here's all the ways you will let down your chapter if you don't attend every single meeting. So just using that guilt and reinforcing that guilt is not helpful. I don't know who that's helpful for. And then ironically, you know, referrals in business overall across BNI was down. So as I was leaving BNI, and thank God I was leaving at this time, they introduced like this mandatory training for new members. They started to make it mandatory again, but for all members once a year. And you have to pay for it because Dr. Ivan Meisner needs his money. So that was kind of some tomfoolery and shenanigans. The next bad thing, and I called this out and I got shut down by senior leadership on this, is the traffic light system. So BNI measures your performance and the performance of your chapter and your region, and you kind of get a comparative analysis of this. If you're in the green, then you're passing lots of referrals, you're meeting all the requirements of BNI, so referrals and continuing education credits and one-to-ones and stuff like that. Yellow isn't so good, red is a concern, gray is bad. They would publicly share traffic lights in your chapter and just engage in this public shaming. And once I called it out and said like, hey, do we have to do this publicly? Do we have to like almost public shame people? And a senior leader said, this is what is prescribed to us by BNI. We have to do this and we agree with it. No critical thinking, no explanation, just like toe the line, engage in public shaming. That wasn't cool for me. Next, and this one particularly hurt me because I am in marketing. BNI would encourage a lot of really poor marketing tactics and encourage people to engage in poor marketing tactics. So for one, actually multiple times, and I'm referencing my notes here, multiple times at meetings when we were trying to encourage visitors, they would tell us, you should cold direct message on social media total strangers and encourage them to come. They told us you should email your own email list and encourage people to come. You should use the phone book. Who even uses the phone book anymore? To look up businesses and get them to come. And my personal favorite, for targeted visitor days to get people to join, they would say, we want people to come who are all in the same category, even though we're not going to let them in, and we should force them to compete because then the best person gets into the chapter and our chapter does the best. I hated that. Next, let's talk about bait and switch. And in particular, I mean, there's other cases of BNI doing this, but this one killed me while I was part of it. All roles are volunteer. So you're paying $1,100 in your first year to join BNI, $850 for subsequent years, plus you pay for meals if your chapter is or has returned to in-person meetings. And leadership roles. So someone's got to be running these meetings, right? So there's a bunch of different roles. There's secretary, treasurer, vice president, president. President and vice president historically had their BNI fees paid for. And in my last year, what they did was they had leadership switchover. So you can only serve a term of 1 year at a time. They had leadership changeover. So people vied for and they got the role of vice president, they got the role of president, and 1 month into their term found out that their fees would not be covered, that they had to start paying for it. And basically when I asked like one of the franchisees about it, he said, we've got to make our money and we're trying to, save money, but we're going to offer swag and we're going to offer freebies and we're going to offer these things, which was nonsense. So you gotta watch out for the bait and switch with BNI. Next, despite how regimented BNI can be, there is a lack of some consistency across chapters. Not usually for the bad, it's usually for the good, but you just gotta watch for that. I visited a bunch of chapters. I was taught that's a cool way to grow and get to know others, and it totally was. The rules at some of the chapters and the protocols that they followed was just so strange. Like, I thought my chapter was rigid. One chapter I visited, allowed absolutely no social chatter or crosstalk during a meeting. Not even chat. Like, they would try and disable the chat when it was online. Another chapter I visited had gamified elements of BNI, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Why aren't we doing this in my chapter? Why aren't we doing this in other chapters? So there is some inconsistencies, and I've heard from people who visited like other BNI chapters and hated BNI, but then, for example, would come to ours and they'd say, oh, this is great. I wish all BNIs were like this. And then I think the final bad element that I can say about BNI is the workload and your expectations. So let's total up those times. You have a weekly meeting of 90 minutes. You have at least one-to-one. So you're expected to do like a 1-hour meeting with someone in your chapter each week to get to know them and figure out how to pass referral business. So that's 60 minutes per week. Then you're expected to do at least one continuing education credit or unit, per month. That's 60 minutes. If you're part of leadership, then you have that workload. When you join as well, you're also bombarded by one-to-one, so the workload is exponential at first as well. Also because you have that mandatory training. Speaking of trainings, you have ongoing trainings you have to be doing. And then on top of that, you have all the paperwork and tracking. Now, thank God I joined when they had removed the paperwork side and it was all electronic, but still, every week I had to remember to sit down and document my one-to-ones, my referrals given, my referrals received, my closed business. So there is quite a workload to being part of it as well, outside of your regular networking meetings. That sounds like, and there can be a lot of detrimental sides to BNI and things that deter people away, but we have got to talk about the fabulous elements of BNI as well. There's definitely a reason that I stayed for a year and a half. There's a reason that I would go back if I could. There's a reason that I still encourage people to join BNI. Number one, and BNI can't sell this. There's no way they can quantify it. There's no way they can appeal to it, but this has definitely been my experience and the experience I've heard of a lot of people, the relationships and the friendships that you form. Meeting the same people week after week really does help form strong relationships. Especially, I know this is my case, there were a few members who thought BNI was culty. So we could all kind of share the laugh of this like collective weird experience that we voluntarily signed up for each week. But just the friendships that come from it. And not just the friendships. There's something powerful about meeting peers and meeting colleagues week after week. You need to vent about your business. You have a community to do that. You need people to bounce business ideas off of. There's a community to do that. You need random information or something random. So for example, I ask people, I'm like, I'm going to my first concert. Do you have any tips for going to a first concert? And they were just able to help me out with that. Those friendships and that community is so incredibly powerful. And while it can be cult-like, that also just brings together like a sense of community that you can't find in other places. I kind of compare it to what I imagine joining a sorority is like. So I will forever be grateful for the community within BNI. Next, I came to love the structure. I loved that I could walk into my BNI meeting, I could walk into any BNI meeting, and I would know exactly how it went. There wouldn't be any surprises, there wouldn't be any shockers, there would be personality for the most part with it, but just going to something that you can regularly count on and that there is stability. Especially as a business owner, when your life is so unstable and there are so many things up in the air all the time, you can just always count on BNI to be the same. And I really learned to love that. Next, actually, and maybe I should have started with this, the referral business is fabulous. Oh my God, getting referrals is just such a dream in business. And actually, here's the secret. And it's funny because I found out people didn't do this. I did. I thought it was, it was prescribed to me, something we had to do at BNI. I did, and it was a game changer for me. Find out in your business what your average transaction size is, and then divide your fees by the average transaction so you know how many closed referrals you need for BNI to pay off. And the bigger the ticket price is on your products or services, the faster and easier it is to close business in BNI. For the most part, there is an exception. I found out I only needed 2.5 to 3 referrals in my business to pay off BNI, and I got those referrals very quickly. So the referral business, as long as you do the tracking, It is, and you can see that money coming in. Oh my God, it's fabulous. Also with tracking though, tracking just allows you to figure out like, how has BNI actually helped your business? Something I've heard from people who left BNI who didn't like their experience. A common element I heard among a bunch of them is that they weren't really tracking their efforts, like the time spent in BNI, the money, and how much money they got from it. The final part of what I think makes BNI really amazing is like whatever motivates you, BNI has for you. I work in marketing, so I have a lot of exposure to psychology and human psychology and how to influence people. And something BNI does right, and mind you, it kind of depends on your chapter, more on that in a bit, is that whatever motivates you, BNI has. If you're motivated by awards, BNI has that. I won an award in my first year because I just came in with a bang. The number of referrals I was giving, the number of one-to-ones I was doing, like I was just, I actually won an award for Rising Star, and that motivated me. But I was also very motivated to be liked and approved by my chapter. So I wanted to give referral business so that I could make my clients happy, but I could also make my chapter happy. So there's that. That also ties to financial rewards. If you're driven by money, BNI is fabulous for you. You want learning and professional development? BNI's got a lot of that for you. You want prizes? They've got that for you. Whatever motivates you, BNI has. That all said, that's bad. That's the good elements. Let's talk about the weird elements of BNI, because there are some things that are just straight out weird, and they are weird depending on your chapter of BNI. Number one is how BNI will subcategorize different categories so that Dr. Ivan Meisner can make his money. The most classic example I see in every single chapter is how they handle financial advisors. So let's recall, a core part of BNI is that there can only be one professional for one category. So when I was in my category, I was the only social media marketing consultant. We had a website person. He was the only website person. We had a chiropractor. He was the only chiropractor. But they will subdivide categories if they can and if it can make them money. The biggest one I see is financial advisors. Financial advisors all offer the same things: insurance products, investment products, savings accounts. But they will break it down. So in our chapter, we had like 4 people who did this, and they all truly in their businesses offered all the exact same services, but they could only have one category. So one guy was only allowed to talk about commercial insurance. One guy was only allowed to talk about retirement planning. One person was only allowed to talk about investments. One person was only allowed, like, see how absurd that is? They would subdivide these categories, and then they would get all hung up on, like, what can you talk about, what can't you talk about, when, where, how, to who. If you have insecure members in your group, this, though, can lead to a lot of conflict. For example, I once heard of a naturopathic doctor who almost bullied a woman who was selling essential oils, saying, like, you can't talk about how essential oils may help with headaches because I, as a naturopathic doctor, help with headaches. So that naturopathic doctor was pretty insecure, and subdivided categories didn't work out for them. So you got to check in with that on your chapter. Next, the weird thing was initiatives. BNI just seemed to be constantly rolling out initiatives, and most of them were pretty dumb. My least favorite was the Pareto Club. So if you were in the green, you were a top performer with BNI, like I was, you were invited, and not even invited, you were forced into this thing called the Pareto Club. But the Pareto Club just demanded more of its members. So I was like, what is this thing that I got? Now, one, I did get swag. I'm highly motivated by swag. So I got swag, but otherwise they were like, you get an exclusive newsletter, which I don't have time to read because I'm running a very successful practice. You get access to an exclusive podcast, which I don't have time to listen to because I'm busy running a successful practice. And you can come to training and events that I don't have time for because I'm running a successful practice. And the trainings you had to pay for. Why am I giving you more money when I'm already paying all this money? And this year you forced trainings that I had to attend that we had to pay for. No. Next was the concept of power teams. So there's this idea that when doing referral business, some businesses are more likely to refer to others. But our chapter already had this. So this is why, for me, this was just weird, because, like, I came into a chapter that was already doing this. So I got to know all the other people who offered marketing services or marketing adjacent services. So we had a graphic designer, we had a print print person. We had someone who printed like swag on products. And we had a website person. All of us were already sending lots of referrals to each other because when I offer social media services, it's very common people say, oh, do you do websites as well? And I say, no, but I know someone who does. And someone gets a banner stand and they're like, I'm doing this banner, but I'm getting this banner done, but you know, I'm going to this event. I don't know how to handle the social media for it. And they go, I know a social media person. So our chapter was already doing it, but then BNI tried to regiment it and structure it. And we were like, no, we don't need that. We're just going to keep doing our own thing. So the initiatives were weird. Next, which was weird, was changing rules and requirements. This is particularly weird, strange, or difficult if you've been part of BNI for any amount of time. So, for example, in my time, my short time with BNI, I saw a rule change where guests could come and enjoy a meal for free versus now whoever invited the guest had to pay for that guest's meal because Dr. Ivan Meisner needs his money. So BNI would no longer pay for it. We also got the new rule where members had to take a mandatory training once a year, every year, and we had to pay for it. So you just have to be careful of like changing rules and requirements. Next, and so important, and there's no mechanism for this. We're going to talk about two things that there's no mechanism for, and there should be. One, not all industries are created equal. So I'm very privileged in saying that a part of my BNI success was because I'm in a hot industry, social media marketing. Throw a rock and you will always hit someone who wants to talk about social media marketing. Any chapter I go into where there's an open spot for social media marketing, I've always been welcomed. I've been asked to join many chapters, and when once I did join BNI, I made mad coin because I was in a hot industry. But on the flip side, I've heard that it's very common for realtors to not even make one sale from BNI in their first year. So they have to pay the $1,100 to $1,200, whatever, and the ongoing fees, and hope that they build enough relationships and over time that in the second year they get a payoff, and they get more payoffs. So not all industries are created equal. Next, there is no mechanism for what I'm calling hard to hear feedback. BNI will let members stay even if chapter members don't like a member. So, for example, I was doing my mandatory one-to-one with a member that I did not like. I will just say I straight up did not like the way they conducted themselves, the things they said in public, the things they said behind closed doors with me when they thought it was safe to say so, discovering they were slightly transphobic, they were homophobic. So that member complained to me that they weren't getting referrals, and they didn't understand why they weren't getting referrals. But the more I got to know and befriend other chapter members, I found out from a bunch of other chapter members, they would never refer to that original member because they also had those same feelings. But there was no mechanism to give that member any feedback and say, hey, you're doing things that are really turning off your chapter, and that's why you're not getting referrals from BNI. So that is something I wish changed. Next, a weird one, BNI is owned by franchisees and is run by franchisees. And so that creates some strange experiences around like, who do you go to? Who's responsible for different things? Also, though, can create division between like members and leadership. I'm going to say, I was part of a franchise, my BNI chapter was part of a franchise, where one of the franchisees was not even a business owner, had never run a business a day in their life, was a teacher. And I'm like, what place do you have telling me about how to give and get referrals when you don't know a single thing? You don't have sales targets. You don't have your bills to pay that are dependent on how well this whole thing goes. So that's a little weird. Like anybody can be a franchisee, and franchisees also dictate like how much of the cult Kool-Aid you have to drink. So you got to be careful with your franchisees and just watch out for that. The last weird thing is how prescriptive they are in the advice that they give. So I say like go in with do your own training, do your own work, and test things because they will be super prescriptive. If you need prescriptive advice, cool, great. It's a great starting point, but don't stay there. For example, they would say like, here's how to give a testimonial. Here's how to, and it's like, no, that's bad advice. They'd say, here's how to invite someone to a chapter. No, that's bad advice. So you got to be careful with how prescriptive they are. In conclusion, BNI is fabulous if you work it and if it can work for you. People make or break the experience. I loved my chapter. My chapter, over half of the chapter was personal friends. My massage therapist was in my chapter. My financial advisor's in my chapter. He came to my wedding. My chiropractor's there. My realtor, is there. And the people really make it. Even though I left to take a full-time job in teaching, I would still go back. If I could, if I had the time in my schedule, I would go back to my chapter because they're just that wonderful. And BNI really worked for my business. And that's not just a one-off. Before I joined my original chapter, I had visited another chapter and it went so fabulously. I was actually going to join that one, but a spot opened up in my city, so I joined the chapter in my city. So it can be done in many different cities and many different chapters. People make or break that experience. The other big piece of advice I'd say if you're thinking about joining BNI is just to make sure to track your numbers. Know what an average transaction is, how many transactions you would need to make back your money from BNI, and then go for it. It's totally possible. Comment and let me know, where are you in your networking experiences? Have you heard of BNI? What are your thoughts on BNI? Maybe after this video. As always, be sure to like and subscribe for all things digital marketing, business, speaking, teaching, and training. Thanks, friends. We'll chat soon. Bye for now.